It's 10 times the terror.
Hello and welcome to 10 Times the Terror.
Not okay.
Hello and welcome to 10 Times the Terror. My name is James.
And I'm Paul.
And I'm Gwen.
And on today's special episode, we're going to be discussing a relatively new Netflix show. You may have heard of it. It's called Midnight Mass. This is the latest Mike Flanagan project, and we thought it'd definitely be worth discussing. Mike Flanagan's been kind of pretty prominent in the horror scene as of late. He directed such films as Hush, including and Dr. Sleep, the new Stephen King story. That's the sequel to The Shining. But he's done a lot of these Netflix shows. He did The Haunting of Hill House, which I liked quite a bit, as well as The Haunting of Bly Manor. And so this is his latest kind of one-off series called Midnight Mass. It's a total of 7 episodes. You can watch now on Netflix. I think the whole thing dropped on September 24th of last year. And I watched this a few months ago, so I'm a little bit removed from it, but I recommended both Dad and Gwen, you both watch it, because I think there's a lot going on in it and it has a lot to say about, obviously, religion and so many stuff. And so I think we can kind of go around and maybe give our general thoughts and then maybe kind of organically let the conversation unfold from there. But right off the bat, I think there's a lot going on in this show, and it's kind of worth getting right into it. So I think right off the bat, we're just going to say that we will be discussing this show in depth, going into spoilers. So if you haven't watched Midnight Mass, go watch it on Netflix. Come back, listen to our discussion. We're going to get into it. We're going to talk about the ending, talk about all the different kind of components and what's going on, because there's a lot to discuss. So, Dad, we can start with you. What are your overall impressions of this show?
Well, I thought it was very engrossing, and there's a lot to talk about. I have to say, I'm not totally happy with how the demonic is portrayed, and I could say more later on. I really have a theological view here, not just a cinematic view. So my view of how you portray the demonic is the way I've approached the whole, for my personal self, approach the whole horror film genre. So I will say more about that if there's certainly people who wouldn't subscribe to my view of this, and that's fine. But that's my one problem with it. I think there's a lot of other things to talk about with it. Very graphic, very bloody. I think that's a general observation I make about a lot of current stuff, that it doesn't have to be as gruesome as it turns out being. But I say that what makes the horror film genre important is it deals explicitly with the problem of evil, which is the biggest problem in human affairs, and it includes supernatural evil, not always but frequently, and that's clearly here in this series. So it's worth talking about and sharing things back and forth about it. There are some very positive things about it too. So that's just a quick overview.
Okay, so I just finished it last night, as per your request. I had no idea what I was getting myself into because I actually haven't seen any of his previous stuff. I know the Haunted Hill stuff was popular, but I just never had a chance to watch it. I was really impressed with this, and I really thought it was much more relatable. Like, I just feel like I have not seen a demonic anything in the last probably 15 years easily that I thought has been in any way, shape, or form scary or believable. Like, I think they're all trash. I hate all of them. They always just have like the worst storylines and like no real depth to them. And I feel like this was the complete opposite. I feel like this really touched, especially for like us growing up always religious. I feel like this really kind of touched on a lot of things in to me, which was a very smart way, where yes, you have this very clear demon, vampire, or whatever, but the whole good and evil, it isn't really so much like good versus evil as how I saw it. It's almost this very nuanced, like how you perceive it and like whether that's right or wrong. But like I thought it was very, very smart the way these overly religious people kind of were explaining away what was clearly evil, but like using the Bible to support it as if it wasn't that bad. Does that make sense? Like it was, whereas
Yeah.
all the normal people, like I feel like I feel like we're supposed to relate to like the Aaron and the Riley, where you kind of go along with the stuff, but you also kind of are putting yourself out of it a little bit, where you're like, this isn't totally normal. I'm going to go with it because I've just always known it. I found myself getting riveted by it as it was going, and I also liked that it wasn't a lot of the jump out scare or the typical gore, which is what usually turns me off. I felt like when the gore was there, it was very purposeful and like only helped further the narrative, so it didn't bother me that much at all. But I really loved it. I want to rewatch the last episode because I feel like there's just so much happening, and I feel like there were so many like onion layers. So I want to like hear more of how you guys kind of took everything, because I definitely feel like we could go down a rabbit hole with everything happening in the series.
Yeah, I think kind of echoing what you're saying, Gwen. I have liked pretty much anything I've seen from Mike Flanagan. I liked the Haunting of Hill House show a lot. I liked Hush. I liked Doctor Sleep. I think this though is the thing I'm most impressed by because of kind of all of the different things it's drawing on. I think kind of right off the bat, what I like is that I think for a lot of people, when they hear kind of like religious horror, if you will, they immediately think The Exorcist or something along those lines, where you're dealing with demonic, but in a sort of like exorcism type way. And so I like that, even though yes, you do have a very real demonic force in this. I thought it was kind of interesting and very almost original that you're taking a lot of the vampire lore and sort of grafting that onto what I see as a very kind of story about the sort of abuse of power in religion in an almost Jonestown kind of cultish way. I mean, I think in the second to last episode where they're about to do this kind of mass suicide, that to me is totally a Jonestown kind of imagery. And I think that's where, I think you're right, Gwen, where we, the audience, are kind of perceiving a lot of this like a Riley or Aaron, the two main leads, but that you're sort of skeptical about some of what's happening, especially as we're seeing these actual miracles start to happen, like with the paralyzed girl beginning to walk, where it's kind of like, oh, this is what's supposed to be a miracle, but you're still kind of sort of like taking it at a distance of what's actually happening. And so for it to kind of reveal itself to be kind of what I like too is that it's showing how a people, in this case like a church and really the community at large, because it's kind of this whole town, is sort of under the spell, if you will, of this kind of very distorted view of religion and kind of like an abuse of power. And you're right, it's kind of what are you doing kind of in the name of the Bible, or in this case how you're perceiving the Bible. And especially then when you have the demon, which the priest believes to be an angel, it kind of is asking that question of like what is blind faith and judgment, and kind of like how is it, as you said, Gwen, your perception of something versus what it actually is.
Yeah, I think what I love the most though about the demon angel is I feel like you could argue, is it a demon or is it maybe an angel? Because what I love, which Dad, I feel like you've said this so many times in sermons, like the one, like you've always said the one thing that the angels always say before anything else is like, don't be afraid, or like fear not. So like there's something scary about angels, that like from what we understand, like that they have 3 wings and that they have all this weird stuff, whereas in art and stuff we always see them as these like glowing beautiful figures. I just like that even the craziest religious lady, her name is Beverly, I love that she uses that literally to like kind of write away the fact that this is probably a demon vampire, but like the argument I think is a good argument, that's like, well, maybe it is an angel, or like what does that really mean, like I kind of liked that it was very, very smartly nuanced in this. We understand that there's right and wrong, but there's just a lot of like weird things happening where it's like, okay, it's evil, but you see all these positive things happening with the girl being able to walk again, and the mom with dementia getting better and younger, and people with aches feeling better. But then the flip side of that is, you're burning up in the sun, or like, Erin loses her baby, or things like that. And it's like, I thought it was very interesting.
And what I like too is that it doesn't, for a show that is about religion and specifically Catholicism and kind of how it's being corrupted, I think that it does a good job of not really forcing a sort of moral conclusion that isn't already there, and it's not forcing you to either think one way or another. I think, as you said, Gwen, is nuanced enough where you can kind of take your own sort of interpretation of it, of is this, what is positive here, what isn't. It's not forcing any kind of religious views down your throat. It's very kind of, I think, neutral in a lot of ways. And I think what's interesting too about Mike Flanagan, the creator, is that he was raised Roman Catholic. He says he was an altar boy growing up. He's now an atheist, and he has been sober for 3 years. So this is obviously a very kind of personal story, and I think the character of Riley is very much like this sort of stand-in for him. And he's obviously the one that is kind of says that he's sort of an atheist and doesn't believe all this. But again, you're seeing so many kind of things of higher power, whether good or not, happen throughout the show that it really kind of questions kind of everyone's views and how you kind of understand faith and understand belief. And yeah, like when you're being told, as you said, Gwen, when you're being told like fear not, well then when does that get called in question? I think I really like the way the show takes that kind of neutral stance.
Yeah, I have to. It's a very traditional demon. I mean, the demon that should have been, it could be right out of a gargoyle in a medieval church setting, and
Right.
I think given that is so overt. I mean, the fallen priest can be saying, well, he's an angel. No, he looks like, you could, in terms of artwork, you could just go and find all kinds of examples of that kind of a demon, especially with the bat wings and all. And there's many other images you can have of the demonic and even of Satan, which are much more uncertain. Even like the devil and Daniel Webster, and certainly the devil rides out, things like that. I think here's my theological point. If we're dealing with the demonic, we're in a situation where the demonic and Satan himself have been defeated in the cross. This is my opinion, my perspective. They can never be shown as being unopposed or having free reign. And it may be that the opposition is not the most effective, but there needs to be some sense in which these are already doomed figures by virtue of the fact that they are the demonic. And I miss having somebody right from the first time the demon appears to sort of stand up to it, because I think it seems to almost have too much power.
I hear what you're saying, Dad, but do you feel like maybe there was like a little bit of like a Wicker Man type thing happening where the evil was very tangibly overt? And to me, I agree that the demon was very stereotypical demon, but I think what kind of differed for me was how the rest of the characters responded and perceived to the demon. I felt like the way they interacted with it was a little bit different for me. I felt like there was a sense of good and evil, but I feel like the good was the characters that had to make the hardest choices. How did you feel about Riley's final scene on the boat with Aaron, where again you heard the "Near My God to Thee" like playing subtly as he's talking to her, and he's not even overtly telling her anything about the demon or all this stuff, and he has a very clear choice of going along with the evil or standing up to it, and you see him have that what's like a very like, to me that felt very Saint Maud, right, James, like the end of that episode. But you finally see him see the girl that he killed, who's been haunting him the whole season, and she's finally whole again. She's not kind of all like messed up from the accident, and she takes him by the hand, and you see his perspective, where then it flips in the Saint Maud way to Aaron's perspective of him burning up. But I was seeing him, I took that as his final salvation, even though he was trying so hard to kind of do the right thing for so long. But it wasn't until he really turned away from the evil that he kind of was absolved of his sins.
Yeah, I think that's there, and I think it definitely there's a communal expression of faith at the end. But I just, again, this is just my perspective. I think that whenever the demonic is being evoked in any dramatized form, there needs to be right as part of that depiction, an example of the victory of the cross, whether it's at the cross itself, or it may be priests who are struggling, like in The Exorcist, something. But for me, that needs to be there. Otherwise, it gives a faulty view of what the nature of the evil is.
See, I disagree a little bit, because for me, I mean, at the very end of the show, we see the whole community together singing "Nearer My God to Thee," which again is very reminiscent of that's what the hymn they sung at the end of Titanic. So I think they deliberately chose that hymn. But still, they're all singing "Nearer My God to Thee" as this Eastern dawn is rising, and you have, after Aaron sort of slices the one wings of the demon and it's flying away, it's clearly losing power because its wings are ripped. And you can just, I think, even if you don't explicitly see it, you can understand that as everyone that drank the blood's about to die, so will the demon. But I mean, to have all these people singing "Near My God to Thee" as an Eastern sunrise is coming up, I mean, that to me is as clear a depiction of good as you're going to get.
I agree with that.
I agree.
I just think there needed to be some semblance of that from the very beginning.
You kind of wanted that Van Helsing character.
Yeah, I think you have to have it. I mean, otherwise you've got Rosemary's Baby, or all these other kind of Halloween things.
Yeah, I didn't take the ending of this the same way as those films by any means. I did not.
I'm not saying about the ending. I'm talking about from the very first appearance of the demon. There needs to be, in other words, the demon has got to be a figure who already has been defeated, dangerous and active, but lacking in any ultimate power.
Yeah, but I do think it plays into like that Jonestown kind of the manipulation and the brainwashing, where it's not like everyone sees the demon right away, right? Like the Monsieur, we basically know he's completely lost. He's got like Alzheimer's or dementia or something very serious when he kind of like first encounters the demon. So we know he's not even in his right mind. He's, I think, manipulated by it, and it's very slowly the people that kind of find out about the demon, and it's the ones that are the most kind of already under the spell, if you would, of kind of just like this over the top crazy version of religion. And I feel like as the more normal people start to encounter this demon, they're the ones that are like, this is not okay. And I do think that then you have them, by burning down all the shelters before dawn, you have this very overt, like, we're not going to let this get away, and we're not going to let any of the people that have been too far gone get away.
Yeah. I would like to have seen, again, James, I already talked about this. I would like to have seen, given how graphic so much of it is, I would like to have seen the demon at the end burst into flames, rather than just be sort of like, okay, it's going to happen. But we've seen such graphic stuff up to this point. I think that to finalize it, we need I would like to have seen, the sun, as the sun comes up, the demon just turns into flames, kind of like, like Dracula in the daylight.
I think for me, it's like as iconic a look as that demon is, and how traditional it is, and as you say, like in like medieval, imagery and stuff. For me, though, like narratively, the antagonist of the whole story is the priest, is the Father Hill. And I feel like the way I kind of described this yesterday to you, Dad, was that the way I look at the priest and the demon is kind of like in Hound of the Baskervilles, where the hound is the monster, but the villain of the story is Stapleton. He's the one that sort of orchestrates all of this, and the beast is sort of just like an agent. And that's kind of how I saw this. So for me, though, if I look at it where he's sort of like the villain of this story, he's the one we do see burst into flames. And right before he says, "Forgive me." So like, I understand that like the look of the demon is very vivid and has a lot of is very loaded historically, but I still think narratively the priest is the villain, and so we see him burn up.
Yeah,
I agree. And I would also say Bev. I would say she's his right-hand man. She's the one reaffirming his bad choices, and we also see she's the only one that seems to be scared at the end by the sunrise, and we do see her burst into flames too.
That's right too. Is all the people singing "Near My God to Thee," to me, they are the true believers, and they are the ones that are clearly not afraid to die. Whereas Bev is like screaming and digging in the sand. So it's like that also just shows the assurance of faith versus the
Yeah. I mean, I see those as demonic disciples, but I just, for me, as I say, what's really prophetic and the most significant part of the whole tradition is this idea that the power of the demonic has been broken forever. It can only function. It functions in a serious way, but it has no ultimate control. And the opposition, I think, narrowly needs to be there from the very beginning, even if it's not totally effective. I mean, even in the Wicker Man, you've got Sergeant Howard from the very beginning. There's no question that you got opposition to the demonic forces that only then become clear as time goes along. For me, I think, given the fact that it is a demon, a final shot doesn't have to be the final shot of the whole show, but I think seeing the demon itself burst into flame, to me, was something that I really like to have seen, given how graphic, right from the very beginning, that this show is. A lot of others may not share that, but to me, I have a particular theology that I bring to these films. Okay,
Yeah.
and that's how I interpret them. So to me, it was could have been stronger on that. I think the choice of Nearer My God to Thee, as James said, clearly it's a reference to Titanic, but it's also a very traditional hymn. It's not in most hymnals, and I think people should know that. So it means that it is something that goes back several generations.
Yeah, it's almost taught by like word of mouth and the traditions.
I think it's really a 19th century hymn.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, that's another piece of that I would like to think. Yeah, so like in terms of Grace, it'd be in the brown hymnal, but that's it.
But not the red hymnal.
No.
That actually makes it more poignant in a lot of ways, I feel like, because I think a lot of the commentary is trying to say why the demon was able to thrive in this scenario is because he was going into a broken system. Like, there was a lot of focus that I thought was smartly done on kind of ignoring problems. Like, I think a lot of not just religion, but I think also just growing up in certain eras, it was almost like we don't talk about problems, we don't address issues, we ignore them, if it will. And I thought it was interesting in the confessional where Reverend Paul kind of talks about how he was so far gone mentally and everyone kind of knew it, but no one really addressed it. And I think that you could see the church was really failing because of that. And it was almost like no one's going to talk about it. I took that as the demon saw an opportunity to kind of infiltrate a broken system, if you will.
Yeah. And but see, I think, and this is where I'm bringing this up to it. The idea, though, that a very old hymn still has power because of the nature of what it is.
I agree.
In other words, a hymn that is not part of current worship in most churches, as opposed to, I don't know, a more current, familiar, or even a more classic one. All hail the power of Jesus' name, or something like that. But Nearer My God to Thee is really an expression of 19th century Christianity.
That makes the ending even more like triumphant then.
But I'd like to have seen, ways to express that more. Like you say, it's not something that the modern day viewer watching it is going to, generally pick up on.
Although it might be somewhat familiar knowledge that was the hymn sung on the Titanic as it was going down.
Oh yeah, I know, absolutely. So
that might be people's sort of like touch point to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the modern viewer is going to associate that with the Titanic, but I'm saying that it's got roots that go way back on that.
Yeah, but I think it plays more into the story too at the end, where if everyone's singing it and knows the words to it, and it's clearly probably not in their typical hymnal, it's kind of breaking away from that old tradition of the religion that they were following, that, like James was saying, the true followers were following, but the ones leading it were so far lost.
Mm-hmm. But it shows that this foundational faith statement still has power.
What did you guys think about the final moment with the two kids on the boat and the last line where she's just like, I can't feel my legs?
Yeah, I brought that up with James. I was wondering about that myself, and I think, James, you can speak for yourself, but I think it's the idea that all of the demonic influence has been taken away.
Yes.
And she was not, healed by anything that was holy. She was healed by something that was very unholy. And with its disintegration, all of its effects now disappear too.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I was saying.
I'm just
I-
that's really what James
I-
said. I think that's
yeah,
right.
I agree with that. I think what hit me the most with that line though is she didn't seem upset by it. She almost seemed relieved.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, she's moving out from under the influence. So.
yeah, like
Yeah.
The two of them are the sort of like the hope for
Yeah,
people.
the future. Yeah.
And I think kind of going back to what you're saying too, Gwen, about kind of like the demon sort of infiltrating an already kind of broken system. I think especially that this church and this community is specifically a Catholic church, and I think that gives it a greater connotation because we know so much of the real life corruption that exists in the Catholic Church. And so I think you're right. Like I understand what you're saying, Dad. Where like, ideally you'd have the Van Helsing type character, but we know that in real life, in like the real Catholic Church, that person doesn't exist. So when you have a people that is already kind of under a sort of corrupt influence by their leaders, by the people of their church, that's when you then have the bringing in the influence of an actual demonic force, which again, then as we're all kind of saying, I think then makes the ending of all of them singing "Near My God" to thee as the dawn is rising, all the more triumphant. I mean, I did not at all take it as evil is getting away with this.
The evil is presented earlier as being triumphant, but it collapses there.
Right. And I think how I took in terms of having a Van Helsing type character, I think what's more realistic in today's age is that Van Helsing type character that would be saying all the stuff, of kind of the righteous or the whatever ends up becoming like the Bev type character. And how many times do we talk about this and see people in church where it becomes a manipulation tactic? Oh, God's telling me to tell you, X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And I think that came off so well where she was the most evilest of all the characters.
She was the scariest thing in the whole movie.
Yeah, she had
I think that
even
that figure's always there, but I mean the voice of the faith is it needs to be genuine, even though it may have its own weaknesses and so forth. I was also thinking, that the Bev, she's taken very much with the surface reality of all of this. And that the first little exchange you see between her and the minister is over. He's not wearing the right color vestment.
right.
That's her first point.
And we clearly know she can justify kind of killing animals and things if she thinks it's for the greater good. And I love
and
how when
killing people too.
yes, and don't you love when the priest finally does kill someone for the first time, the guy that finally is going to AA and stuff. And he's kind of very upset by what he has done. You see him in the corner, clearly like upset and remorseful, and she doesn't blink an eye, and then she keeps referring to them as it. We have to get rid of it. And the two guys keep being like, this is a guy we know, and they keep saying his name, and she keeps reverting to it as an object, which I thought was such a good like exchange. It just really I think you said she was so caught up with the worldly stuff, and I think she was getting excited by the power coming in, no matter where it was coming from.
Yeah, and she's already set up to be, in the biblical sense, the corrupt religious figure, like the Pharisees or the Sadducees and so forth. The Pharisees who would complain about all the minutia. Well, the first time we really encounter her, she's complaining about the minutia.
Yes.
But I think what's so scary about her is that she feels like someone you would find in your church.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. And the New Testament talks about how demons are in church during worship, but they're not. But I mean that's leading up to to where they're cast out in the cross. I do think that it might be interesting, as I just said, you picked up on it, that "Nearer My God to Thee" is not a current hymn book in most churches. It's not a current hymn, but it also ties you then into the deeper roots of what faith is, and that even when you've been attacked to this degree, where it looks like it's a triumphant kind of evil, the way it's when it first moves in and all these things are happening, that it can't possibly prevail. Finally, win out. It can cause all kinds of trouble. But Hitler can't win World War II. It's this kind of thing, and that is that's a particular theological view that I have, and I think it operates in a lot of film. But that's really how I, even the people have commented on that in stuff I've written. I'm always writing it from the standpoint of Christianity in the horror film, And for me, I have a theological bias, and very clear.
Of course.
And I think that's that idea that the power of the cross is always present now. There's never a time when it's not present. I mean, it can be greater or lesser, but it's never a time when it's not present.
I feel like, too, on that note, like, again, it's obviously a lot of the Catholicism, but you even have like the Muslim characters, like the sheriff, and so even at the end, he and his son are praying on the beach. Like I like that you're drawing in so many different views of belief in general.
And they're in effect part of this same expression of faith. They're not singing the hymn, but they're with the people who are singing the hymn.
Right.
And they are there on the beach and they're worshiping, they're praying. So praise the Lord. Right.
I think what James and I are so drawn to in this, having grown up as your kids and grown up in church our whole lives, is I felt like the way I interpreted the series was a very clear juxtaposition of old versus new, and I took it as the demon, even though he's a literal demon, I felt like it was very purposeful in a lot of ways to make a statement of this old versus new. Like, all the evil stuff is in a lot of ways very old about how they go about it, and all the traditions and all the old traditions is how the demon is thriving in this community. And although you don't have that devil rides out moment, or the that cross blazing or burning up the evil, I feel like the good was presented in the today, where it's like, just by questioning what's happening, they're almost like whispering about it amongst each other when they question anything with a religion, because you're not supposed to do that, like, you're not supposed to question anything that's happening, or you're crazy, or you're whatever. And I think that's how, I mean, we always talk about, like, where is God when bad things are happening, or where is,
Mhm.
God comes in the stillness of the whisper, and all these things. I feel like that was very purposefully juxtaposed, where the good was the subtle and the whisper, and the evil was that old school. To me, the real pinnacle moment of that was the Riley character choosing to accept death when he's kind of forced to be this vampire against his will, and they're trying to sell it to him like it's a great thing. And the first thing he does is go and basically show Aaron what's going on, and by making that sacrifice, that's when he finds peace.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And no one else knows about it. We only know that he is sharing his viewpoint with us as the viewer, but Aaron doesn't even know. He just goes up in a ball of flames, which I think is what real faith and salvation is. It's not this big show. It's this very personal kind of thing that happens. And what I like is this showing of this boisterousness of how religious and wonderful we are, is what I think so many younger people are turned off by when it comes to religion today,
Yeah.
because they know it's fake. They know it's all for show.
Well, it's you do have the power of the tradition in the hymn.
Yeah.
But there's a little, for me, too much domination, and I agree with all stuff, but too much domination, too much free reign for the demon. For lo, his doom is sure. It needs to pervade the whole thing, even in its relative power.
Yeah.
And you think of like something like The Devil Rides Out. You actually have that one scene of the devil with the horns and stuff. Very which is another typical example, that the goat image
Right.
of Satan. And here it's the figure in the back thing. But so yeah, this is calling people out and deceiving them and preparing them for stuff. But now, okay, you're not going to always have the like superhero Christian, which is what you have there. But to have other examples of where people, like the minister in First Reformed, who's a very struggling figure, like going back to Winter Light, are still making strong statements, and they're still holding on to a tradition that is powerful. But there's a lot of compromises, because once it comes into the realm of human activity, it faces all the dilemmas of humans, who even at their best, are not consistent followers of Christ and so forth.
But even First Reformed in a different way does show that kind of like traditional versus modern.
Yeah, right. It does that. Yeah, it's the language of the the language of the cross in Nearer My God to Thee is what I was waiting for the whole the whole 7 episodes.
Yeah.
But I forget how it's Nearer My God to Me. It's like raise me up to the cross. Language to that effect is very telling.
Right.
And it jars with what we've been seeing, which is rightly so. I mean, it should jar. It should, because it's representing something very different.
One thing else I like too, just about the way this is kind of taking vampire and sort of like applying it to the story, is like the way we understand like kind of vampiric lore, if you will, is that vampires, obviously, drink blood and stuff, but they are essentially immortal beings in a very worldly sense. They are tangentially immortal in this life, whereas you juxtapose that with Christian faith, and the idea is that your everlasting life is after this life, is not in your mortal self. And so I think having those two collide, and then where you get to the end where, yes, all the true believers that are singing are doing so in a very communal way, and it kind of really just represents how the church is the people more than the actual building. But also, again, they are
leadership.
More than the leadership.
Yeah. Leadership.
They don't have a fear of death, whereas like the other ones, like the Bev characters, are clearly scared of death, because there's nothing to fear in the majesty of the Lord, kind of thing.
Right. I give it credit. It's a head first encounter with the demonic, and the fact that they're choosing is essentially a medieval image of the demonic.
Right.
But I mean, I gotta say, I do agree with Gwendolyn, though. I do think the evil is portrayed in a very ancient way, whereas the good is
and a very
portrayed in
superficial way.
Yeah, whereas the good is portrayed in a much more modern, realistic way, where you don't have the Christian superhero Van Helsing, because I'm sorry, if you go to church, you don't see that. Like to have it be the everyday people that are of the same faith, I think kind of resonates a little bit more.
The humble believers, count for something, and count for a great deal. You don't have to be a Van Helsing character or a Duke de Richelieu. You can be more like a Sergeant Howie, who hasn't got the whole thing straight, but he's committed to the right thing.
Right, but I really saw that in the Riley character, the one that
I did too.
Came out of prison, and he killed someone drunk driving, and even throughout the series, you'll notice his mother and other people will refer to it as like, again, the it, like, oh, that this happened or it happened, and he's like, no, he's like, I killed someone. He keeps correcting them in the narrative because they want to. I think that there's which is a typical mentality of, you want to push away any negative connotations, and you want to kind of sugarcoat it. Although, Dad, I understand where you're coming from, because we've seen so many horror movies and so many good versus evil movies, and I agree the demon was set up where you should have had that Van Helsing kind of devil rise out moment. I think that the director was trying to kind of make a parody of that in a way, because although the demon is there and he is a present sense of evil, he really is a very subtle character in the storyline. Like he's never the one that I'm the most afraid of in the whole series. And I just feel like James, like what James was saying is, where we already know so much corruption in the Catholic Church and different things. It's almost like I feel like this is trying to portray, how does that slippery slope happen? Like, how do you have so many pedophiles, in the Catholic Church? Like, how does that happen? And again, all the congregants are not aware of it. They're not all okay with something like that, but it's happening, and you have these innocent people that are just trying to be worshipful and stuff, and then you have the corruption. I feel like it was trying to tap into that kind of thing that can happen with any religion, and how we were bringing up the Jonestown or the whatever, but I feel like it was trying to make some kind of commentary of where it's like all these people are receiving communion and they're receiving the demon blood against their will, basically.
Yeah.
And
it's not when it can, it's really
right.
a vampire feast. Yeah.
Right, and they're receiving whatever benefits from it, but even the people that are receiving the benefits reject it. Like you see Riley reject it. Even the mother who's like de-aging, the first time she goes to the church and she sees the monsieur like young, she says to the daughter, "We're never going back there again." Like she knows that there's something evil happening, even though she's benefiting from it. Yeah. So you have these characters that are making very clear decisions throughout that I think is what is the representation of the good and the God and although it's subtle, I think it's done on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I agree, and I think like you said, with all the whatever kind of real life corruption that does exist in the church, you have the ones that are doing it, and then you also have the accomplices like a Bev or someone that's trying to cover it all up or sweep it under the rug. Where then when things come out, it's kind of like, how did people either not know about this or go along with this? When
how they cover it up.
When in reality there are also the certain number of people in the church that are there for good intentions, that are there for the right reasons, even if they are sort of susceptible to what's actually going on.
It's like the Camp of the Woods
I mean,
with Ravi Zachariah.
Yeah, like the Ravi Zachariah thing. I was literally about to say that, and we even talk about this where it's like, oh, do you try to separate? Oh, he was a good man. Oh, blah blah blah. I think the demon was done so purposefully in this very one-dimensional, cheesy way to bring out all these innuendos, and it's like, it's like how we're gonna be talking about like Mouse and like the Nazis and how it's like, oh, you have to come with an open perspective. Like no, like if a person does wrong and they're wrong, then they're in the wrong. Then everything is wrong. Yeah. It's you can't separate the pedophile and the sex trafficker and the sex ring person from, oh well, he gave very good testimonials. Like right. No.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, in that by that logic, you kind of need a literal monster in this case to really make it not nuanced or
right, because I think people will try to downplay the monstrous acts as if they're not a big deal, but they are a big deal.
Yeah. As perverse as these things can be, certainly all the stuff in the Catholic Church, as perverse as that is, there is there's a counterpoint always there, and it may seem weak or compromised, but it's there, and the artistry is how you negotiate all those things. As I say, I have a very definite theological perspective here.
I agree with that, but again, to me, you're saying like you wanted something just as kind of overt. To me, that is the people together singing "Near My God." Today. I mean, I can't think of something more triumphant than that against a Eastern dawn rising.
I like to have seen some intimation of that earlier.
But I think we know those characters are that throughout the whole show. I mean, you're seeing that really come to fruition at the end, but those characters are there the whole show. Yeah. And I think to what Gwen was saying earlier, where sometimes like the good is like as still as a whisper, you could say that they are, okay, it's as still as a whisper early on the show, but it's present.
Yeah, it's clearly there. I would like to see, given how overt the image of the demonic is, it doesn't have to be equally overt. It doesn't have to be, say that, these outstanding Christian leaders. But just something more about that, what's going to come out at the end anyway, so.
I understand what you're saying. Even if it was a small nod to those Devil Rides Out and old films, to kind of acknowledge. I understand what you're saying.
Yes. It's like the even as far back as the very first supernatural film in American history, Dracula. Before you've ever encountered Dracula or anything, when you got Renfield there, remember the old woman comes over and puts the rosary over his head and says, "Just wear this for your mother's sake."
Right.
I mean that's all it is, and then that shows up again later on in the earlier part of the film. It's small and it's subtle, and it will be developed much more strongly later on. but it's there from the very beginning.
Yes, but what's different in this series is the evil is coming from the church itself.
Yeah.
So
right,
people
right.
are engaging with the evil, thinking that they are
Right.
being
Which-
holy people.
That is a powerful statement.
And I think as strong and impactful as like something like The Wicker Man is, you can make the argument that the good and the evil are so, I don't want to say diluted, but so like direct that it's almost like a black and white conflict. This is so much more nuanced.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think you're right. To have the evil be coming out of the church, that I think just makes it so much more dimensional.
Yeah, it does.
Right. But to where even Monsieur Pruitt at the very end is negating all the evil he's done, right? Like he's turning on the evil itself at the very end. He's setting the church on fire,
Yeah.
and he's realizing how lost he got. And that's where I feel like what James was saying and stuff is it really plays into that like cultish mindset where you get so clouded and lost in what you think is right, but you've been so kind of bogged by this like fog of perspective.
Well, and it's like the inhabitants of Summer Island, the Wicker Man. They're
Right.
all
Exactly. Everyone's
brainwashed.
exactly.
I do think that one of the issues with things like this in the real world is that not only is it these horrible things they're doing and kind of getting away with, but to have the people, whether it's the other leadership or whoever, downplaying it or even just saying like, oh well, they did mean this. You're not addressing the issue, and so you're not sort of like ridding the cancer, if you will, of the church, and so it's only going to stay there and kind of grow there, and then you're not eradicating the actual evil, if you will, that is existing within the church.
I mean, they can't even outright condemn it.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
The nearer my God to thee also invokes, it may not be, it invokes an image, which is not always completely truthful, but no, it invokes an image of a more innocent faith.
Mm-hmm.
This would have been the Catholic, the churches before, these corrupting influences became so apparent as they are now.
And that hymn plays faintly in the backdrop of Riley when he's talking to Aaron on the boat, because that's when I first picked it up, because I love that hymn. And then when they're singing it at the end, I'm like, oh, this is the hymn of the purity of the faith, if you will.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Especially for this to be taking place on this, isolated, remote, close-knit community where kind of everyone knows each other and everyone goes to church on Sunday. I think it registers a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And also the emotion. It's like, being someone that's always been in the choir and the music is something that I always love. It's so clear the way they sing so many hymns, kind of briefly throughout the series. And it's that typical, we're Presbyterian, but that typical Presbyterian, like, you just mumble along and it's not really, you're just trying to like not be heard kind of. But at the end, when they're all singing together, it's very, very passionate. And it's very different than any of the times that they sing the hymns in the series, and I was so moved by it.
And again, it's knowing that they're all about to die and not having a fear.
Yeah,
I think that really resonates.
I mean, it's sort of like Sergeant Howie with his statements of belief, knowing he's going to die.
But even Sergeant Howie though is way more like emotional distress. He's clearly scared still, and I think that's
at the very
like as he's literally burning alive, he's clearly like crying out. So I think there's a calmness in the people on the island. Yeah. Which and as you said, Gwen, they are very passionately singing. No one is mumbling the words, and so I think that there's a calmness to them, which is complete contrast to like Bev, who's like screaming her head off as about to.
I really liked that scene a lot, and I mean, I know it would have been nice to see the demon burst into flames, but they do make it very clear that there's not a sheltered area for like 30 miles or something like that. Like when they're burning all the structures down, they make it clear like, oh, it's like 30 miles to the next like covered shelter. So we know that the demon didn't make it. Like we know that, but
and again, we see its clipped wings sort of like failing, and it's going off into the ocean where there's no immediate land.
And the nearer my God, it really is an affirmation of faith.
Oh yeah.
No, I said that I watched the show kind of when it first came out, so I'm a little bit removed from it overall. But before this episode, I did just go back and rewatch that very ending, and I do think it's very powerful. It really
I do too.
is poignant and really hits in a not just a spiritual way, but an emotional way. And I think you make a good point, Gwen, too, that you do hear it a little bit at the scene when Riley dies, and it is just very. It becomes like a sort of through line throughout the show.
Yes.
But this is the equivalent of Van Helsing with the candlesticks.
Exactly. Well, that's what we're trying to say. Is that that's
Right.
what we're saying is that it's just they choose to be very subtle about the good. I think they choose very consciously throughout the whole thing to be subtle about the good. And I think that's a much more realistic take on things, because you could say, oh, evil's so obvious. It's a big demon drinking your blood. But we know in the real world, it's really not that. It's not that obvious, right? And I think making it,
or if it is that obvious, it's how do people not see? I'm sorry, like Ravi Zachariah, you have your own massage parlor, and that's not a obvious red flag. So I think like it is kind of like, as you said, Gwen, like almost like commenting and parroting that idea.
Yeah, but it's not only oh, that's a questionable thing for a religious speaker to have, but you find out his whole team their whole job is to just cover it up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so it's not even like, oh, we don't know. Oh, it's kind of weird, but it's
abusive.
And it's abusive. Yes, exactly.
What I like too about, again, like the sort of the subtlety of the good compared to the overtness of the evil. I think if you look at the way kind of church in general is perceived in like the media, all the stories we ever hear about church are all negative things, whether it's a Ravi Zachariah, whether it's the corruption in the Catholic Church. We only hear negative things about church and about Christianity. And I think that's where then we know that as real as those things are and as problematic as they are, there is still good in the church. And that even if that's not what's covering the headlines, that's still present. Yeah. And so I think
what I loved about the characters is the ones that are actually purely religious. To me, they came off so relatable. Like, I loved the scene with the girl that could walk again when she confronts the guy that was just like drunkenly shooting around and like happened to shoot her in the spine. And I love her interaction with him where she's one of the most pure and religious figures within the church. She's the one kind of, trying to bring new people in, and she's so rawly honest of like, I've dreamt of you begging for my forgiveness for me to tell you no. Like it's so
very honest.
it's so honest, and I respected that scene so much because they didn't even have to give that character that much screen time, and she could have been this one-dimensional character. And I think that's partly why, like, she was always very in tune with her true emotions and her religion. And I think that's why it's so poignant that at the end, she has the final say, just saying, I can't feel my legs anymore, but almost like in this relieved kind of way. Like she kind of comes off as, she's kind of like the Tiny Tim of it all. She's the pure, innocent, like nothing but good intentions character, but is still very honest and open, where we see through the whole series, it's a lot of people trying to pretend that bad things didn't happen and trying to like sugarcoat kind of like any emotional distress or mental issues or anything like that. Whereas I think especially after 2020, we're doing the opposite of that. We're trying to get really in touch with our feelings and our emotions and trying to really delve into the problems and rawly address them rather than pretending that they're not there. So I really felt like there was a big contrast between kind of like old generation religion and like new generation religion.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you can almost see her again like temporarily getting her, or like the strength in her legs back, as almost like that's the sort of attractiveness of evil. And so then as she says, like, I can't feel my legs again, it is a sort of like relief of like, you're no longer.
Yeah, that because for so long evil has been triumphant, and then but that's funny, as I say, it always gets exposed to a greater or lesser extent, but yeah, it's I really am. The more I think about it, I really am intrigued by the whole use of. I kind of want to go out and look up the verses of "Nearer My God to Thee," because I don't know it that well myself.
My boy Brian Fallon sings it on his new Hymns and Christmas album.
Yeah, I don't think it's in our hymn book, so I think that's one reason why we haven't sung it as a congregation.
It's in something that we have.
Well, I would have think it was in the Brown hymnal. I could be wrong, but I don't think it's in the the red hymnal we were using for.
I mean, it's a simple hymn. It's near my God to thee, near to thee. Even though it be a cross that raiseth me, still all my song shall be near my God to thee, near my God to thee, near to thee. Though like the wanderer, the sun gone down, darkness be over me, my rest a stone. Yet in my dreams I'd be near my God to thee, near my God to thee, near to thee. There let the way appear, steps unto heaven, all that thou sended me, in mercy given. Angels to beckon me, near my God to thee, near my God to thee, near to thee. Then with my waking thoughts bright with thy grace, out of my stormy griefs, Bethel I'll raise. So by my woes to be near my God to thee, near my God to thee, near to thee. Or if on joyful wings cleaving to the sky, sun, moon, and stars forget, upward I fly. Still all my song shall be near my God to thee, near my God to thee, near to thee. So it is a very packed hymn.
And it summarizes the whole.
It
series,
summarizes
right?
the whole
Yeah.
series. It really does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now that we go through the verses, I don't know how we didn't begin with that. It's like,
Yeah. Well, what I like to, and again, I feel like clearly this show has given us enough to sort of talk about, and I think that maybe just speaks to the quality overall. But I think what I like is clearly Mike Flanagan, he understands horror and he understands Christian religion very well, and so I think he's making very deliberate choices throughout the whole show.
Yeah, and I would say even though he's, like you said, he's now a proclaimed atheist, I didn't take this as an atheistic view by any means.
Neither did I. Neither did I.
Yeah, if you're an atheist, why are you concluding with near my God to thee? Right?
Well, because he probably still has roots that he relates to, in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean it can be euphemistic, but
Yeah.
the fact that that's.
But that's what I like about this show overall is that it's nuanced enough where it's not telling you exactly what's right or wrong in terms of Christian faith versus other faith versus atheism. It's broad enough where you can still kind of interpret things the way, again, as you said this whole episode, Dad, you're applying your theological bias to a lot of this. I think there's enough nuance here that you can kind of interpret things the way you want to. And I think a lot of great stuff does it. I mean, I think Winterlight, Wicker Man, as we mentioned, they're nuanced enough where you can interpret.
I mean, First Reformed,
you can interpret them the way you want to. Because as we said, Wicker Man, you could interpret as okay, he's a triumphant Christian throughout, but you could also look at it as he dies and falls right into the trap of these people. So it's I think good stories like this give you enough where you can kind of see different perspectives.
Definitely.
Which is a lot
and I
of
think
the biblical narrative,
Yeah.
Yes, and it brings up a lot of the goods and bads of organized religion, right? Because we know it's always done in good faith, but as we know, organized religion can fail itself.
Right. And things like the Bible can be not just misinterpreted, but distorted for corrupt means.
Intense discussion. We're over an hour now, so we need to start.
Okay.
We need to start wrapping it up, or this episode's going to be our longest episode ever.
Okay. I feel like we've said kind of everything we need to say, and
yeah,
I've enjoyed this discussion because I think it just if anything, this only makes me appreciate the show even more.
I agree.
All right. Well, I guess that'll kind of conclude this very lengthy episode discussing Midnight Mass. So hopefully this gave you the audience something to think about, and hopefully you had some certain takeaways from watching this show. But yeah, this will conclude today's episode of 10 Times the Terror. I'm James.
I'm Paul.
And I'm Gwen.
See you next time.
Thank you for listening to
It's 10 Times the Terror,
the podcast.
One of my favorite films ever. Let's do that one again.
Thank you for listening to 10 Times the Terror. This podcast would not be possible without listeners like you. You can find out more about our podcast by visiting our website, 10timestheterror.com. That's 10xtheterror.com.